So Georgia remains the team to beat in the SEC until further notice, but what does this roster look like on Saturday without Brock Bowers against Florida? If you're brand new here, welcome on into the channel. My name is Cole Thompson. I'm a radio show host based in Houston, Texas, and I talk college football. Every day I talk NFL, MLB, NHL, NBA, but I love talking college football, and if this is something that you're intrigued in, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below. Who do you think wins the world's largest outdoor cocktail party? What does Georgia look like in your opinion without Brock Bowers? And also, make sure to give the video a thumbs up. If we get to 1,000 subscribers by November 15th, I will shave my head live on air, Lex Luthor style. You're not going to want to miss, so make sure that you hit the subscribe button. Tell your friends, your family, your bosses, your colleagues, even your enemies. If you think I sound like a Muppet, give them pure pain of listening to my voice. But let's go ahead and talk college football. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party. This is always a game that I am more elated by in the SEC scheduling because it's a great matchup. It is. For years, this game really did determine who would come out victorious and probably win the SEC East, because not only would you have bragging rights, but you also would have the tiebreaker if both of you finished 11-1, 10-2. This determined 90% of the time who was going to Atlanta. And Georgia has dominated the series. They have for a very long time. It's why Georgia continuously is finding itself making trips to Atlanta in early December and eventually the college football playoff. But Florida this year is actually a really intriguing team. Like, they're definitely not at the same level as I would even put Missouri at this point. And I wouldn't even say that they probably are the third best team in the SEC. I think right now that either goes to the Tigers, that goes to Ole Miss, which, by the way, if you haven't been paying attention to Ole Miss, if that offense doesn't fall apart in the second half of games, they probably are the third best team in the SEC. But another video, another time for that one. Florida this year is sitting at 5-2. They have two really close but horrendous losses. One coming at the season opener in Salt Lake against Utah, who, again, Utah is just Utah. And the other one coming against Kentucky. And Kentucky just ran the football with no one's business. In the history of college football, Florida has allowed 4 200 rushing yard games, and one of them came against Ray Davis. So outside of that, they've kind of done their job. They haven't been perfect by any means, but they do seem to be turning the corner offensively. They have two very good running backs in Trevor Etienne and Montrell Johnson. Graham Mertz, surprisingly, is not as big as a problem as I think a lot of people thought he would be when he decided to leave Madison and go down to Gainesville. He actually is one of the better quarterbacks when it comes to passing yards, completions. If I'm not mistaken, he's averaging roughly about 235 yards per game. He's completing over 76% of his throws. He's been good. And defensively, Austin Armstrong has dialed up formations that has made this team very potent. Now, not elite by any standards, but you can say that the version of Florida that we saw last year is all but extinct. Now we're talking about a Florida team that maybe doesn't deserve to be ranked just yet, but a win would guarantee that they are bowl eligible in year 2 of the Billy Napier era. It also would probably help out in terms of recruiting, because if you can beat up on Georgia in a brand new SEC with NIL, this is a massive victory, especially when you look at teams like Miami and now UCF being a Big Ten, being a Power 5 team, and you throw in a Florida State for that matter. Kids are still going to know the brand and the recognition of what Florida is. So a win over your rival is massive. And I'm not going to say that this is not worthy of talking about in terms of a win, because if you think about it, have you noticed that this year we're not talking about the world's largest outdoor cocktail party as much as we should? Like, every single year, I remember early October, what we'd always have would be the third Saturday in October between Tennessee and Alabama. And then right afterwards, we moved into the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. And it was great because of this is what college football is supposed to be. A headliner matchup. It's like going to a boxing event where you know you have the smaller cards and then you get to the main show. And every week in the SEC, you had that. And it just feels like this year, we don't have that when it comes to the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. I digress. Sorry about that. And I think the reason why is because, number one, we expect Georgia just to completely dismantle Florida because, well, that's just been bread and butter as of late. And then also, Georgia this year is the only team that's undefeated in the SEC. And we're not focusing in on one of the major downsides to this roster. No Brock Bowers. Bowers being out is a massive, massive win for Florida. And it's not like this is a cheat code by any means. Sorry, Jim Harbaugh, you've done enough of that in a minute. But what this does do is it gives you an advantage to take and pick apart at the flaws of Georgia. And Georgia, surprisingly, has been a very good team this year. They are far from playing up to the standard of what we've expected from back-to-back national champions. But Carson Beck has actually looked very good. I think a lot of people are not seeing him have this Heisman-worthy caliber season where receivers are going deep downfield and he's not living up to the five-star name. But Carson Beck is completing about 73% of his passes. He only has 4 interceptions. He's been sacked 5 times. He averages roughly about 295 yards per passing game. He's averaging about 9.1 yards per throw. The guy is making the right calls at the right times, and he's connecting with the receivers. But unfortunately, that main receiver has been Brock Bowers. And you just look at the stat line, it speaks for itself. Bowers not only leads the team in receptions, the only player that comes close to matching him is Dominic Love, who has 31 receptions and over 300 yards less. That's where we are when it comes to the security blanket of Brock Bowers. It's a game to where I think Georgia can actually show the world what they're made of. Because every year, when you have a great coach or if you have a security blanket, you stand a chance. And I think that you look at some of these teams in college football right now, they've had that. Georgia, Brock Bowers, last 2 years, absolute stud. Going into year 3, absolutely going to be a top 10 pick in next year's draft. Ohio State has Marvin Harrison Jr. They shouldn't have just won that game outright against Penn State. But here was the problem. One team had Marvin Harrison Jr., the other team didn't. That really is the dictation. Washington has Michael Penix Jr. And if Michael Penix Jr. is balling out, you have a shot. If he isn't, like we saw against Arizona State, there's problems. And the same thing goes for a Bo Nix at Oregon. And the same thing goes for, I would say, an Xavier Worthy at Texas, or Dylan Gabriel at Oklahoma, or Keon Coleman at Florida State. You have your X factor. And if your X factor goes off, you're basically marking the spot towards victory. So this is a game to where I think Georgia, now not having that elemental factor and that key weapon X as we would call them, this is a moment to where Georgia can really puff out its chest and show the rest of the SEC, good luck. Good luck. Because if they have the talent, when Georgia this offseason decided to actually target players in the transfer portal, they went after wide receivers. And good ones, I might add in. Dominic Love last year at Missouri led the Tigers in receiving yards and in receptions. He has not lived up to expectations so far when he's been in Athens. Ra Thomas played for Mississippi State, leading receiver last year for Will Rogers. Leaves, goes to Athens, really hasn't been that big of a factor. I mean, if you look at his numbers overall, 16 catches, 1 touchdown reception, 256 yards. That's not what you're expecting from number 1 mentality, even if you are the number 3 role in the offense. And it'll be interesting to see how guys like Oscar Delpit step up, or another guy like maybe Marcus Rosemary just go ahead and have a big-time role. But therein is your key. You don't need the tight end to be a successful player. What you need is your other role players to step up and carry the load. So Brock Bowers is getting 15 targets per game. Ra Thomas has to now take 4 of those, and one of them has to be for a gain of 20. Or Dominic Love has to take 3 of those, but 2 of them have to be for first downs, and 1 has to be for a touchdown. Or an Oscar Delpit has to convert 3 times on third down to make up for the lost production. Because Florida, as good as I think Florida can be under Billy Napier, and this is also hindsight 2020, we'll get into it in another video. As good as I think Florida can be under Billy Napier, they're still in construction this year. So anything that they do in this game, no one's going to bat an eye. Because if they just find ways to get wins down the stretch and maybe go 8-4, and 8-4 is a very big possibility, especially with the win on Saturday. 9-3, still a plausibility. You know, you play Florida State toward the end of the year. Most of your more, I would say, challenging games are out of the way. You still have left on the schedule LSU and Arkansas and Missouri. So you still have the opportunity to get some quality wins. But Florida isn't really having to worry about this game. If they just win, it's great for them and it's great for the resume. For Georgia, it shows your limitations and it shows where you stand among college football playoff contenders. If you have to rely heavily on only Brock Bowers and you can't trust the rushing attack led by Dejon Edwards, or you can't trust what you have in Kendall Milton, or you can't trust that on third down, Carson Beck is going to be able to sling it to the outside to a Ra Thomas or a Dominic Love, that's where you're in trouble. So I think that right now, this is going to be a really interesting matchup for Georgia if they can find ways to eliminate the areas of weakness of what Brock Bowers' departure would mean. So that just means getting the ball in receivers' hands. That means targeting players to make up for lost production. That means instead of trusting just your tight end position, you start trusting your other receivers that you added in. And it goes back to the ground game. It's not as if Florida is an elite run defense. Now, don't get me wrong. They've played better as of late, but if you remember that game against Kentucky, Ray Davis found a crease and he was off to the races. I mean, that was it. It was basically race Ray Davis. That was the game for the Gators. And if Georgia can do that, then you don't really have to worry about the passing attack. But this is a big key element for Georgia moving forward. How are they going to respond without Brock Bowers? How are they going to be able to utilize these other receivers in the passing game? How do they attack a young Florida secondary? And if they can do that, they probably win. The line's at 14. It's a little high, in my opinion, without your security blanket, but I understand this is the two-time national champions. Georgia still has some tests along the way. They do. This game against Florida is a blip in the radar because you still got Ole Miss on the schedule. You still have Missouri in that defense and what Brady Cook is cooking up in Columbia on the schedule. You still have a game against Tennessee in Neyland Stadium. That's left on the radar. But if you can set the tone this weekend in Jacksonville, you can find that you don't need Brock Bowers to be successful. You can be an offense that not only starts fast, but continuously moves the chains and walks away with any type of points. 3 points, a field goal for that matter, is sufficeable. You do that, Georgia still remains the team to beat, not only probably in the SEC, but likely all in college football. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching that video. Don't hit the X button yet. Make sure you hit subscribe to keep up with all of our daily content found on Just Saying It and anything else that we post on this channel. Bye.